Good afternoon. The meeting is now live streamed.
Thank you very much, Anna. Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the virtual meeting of the Education Advisory Board. I'm Councillor Susie Horton. Oh, there's some background noise. I'm Councillor Susie Horton. I'll be chairing the meeting today. We're meeting virtually in response to the limitations placed on governance by the COVID-19 pandemic. And until recently, the law stated that all members had to be present in the room to make formal decisions at meetings. However, the law was amended in response to the COVID-19 emergency, and councils are able to hold public meetings virtually. So welcome. This is in accordance with the Local Authorities Coronavirus Flexibility of Local Authority Meetings Regulations 2020 number 392. Members of the public are invited to view this meeting online. This is a new experience for many participants and we will all need to exercise patience and understanding. Well, actually, I think probably now we're a bit more used to it, but while we familiarise ourselves with the new arrangements. Those present in this meeting are requested to keep their cameras turned on at all times and their microphones on mute, and to only turn them on when they're called to speak, as this will limit the amount of background noise which can be very disruptive. Officers and presenters are requested to turn their cameras on only when they're presenting their reports or answering questions. Members and those who wish to speak should use the chat to write their name followed by RTS, request to speak. Please do not use the chat for anything else. It was very entertaining yesterday in full council seeing that. Please, it says don't use the chat icon on the left, but I don't have one. So basically use the chat if you would like to speak and put RTS and say who you are so it's clear who's speaking. Okay, and I'll be monitoring that chat. If there are technical difficulties, we will endeavour to resolve these and where necessary have a brief adjournment, but the meeting can proceed where quorate. Okay, so, I can see Steve is waiting in the lobby, so I've just admitted him. So I'm just going to ask everyone taking part today to confirm that they are present. And I am going to ask you if you are, and if you could confirm that you are with your name, that would be great. Okay, so I'm going to start with my screen top left, which is Fiona.
Right, I've not been listening because somebody came in to do something. so basically, others and I'll come back to you.
Okay, we'll go others and we'll come back. Okay, Frank Jonas, Councillor Jonas.
Councillor Frank Jonas, present.
Terry?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Terry Norton, present.
And Jeanette?
Councillor Jeanette Smith, present.
Debbie?
Debbie Anderson, Head of School Improvement and Early Years, present.
Mike?
Yeah, Mike Stoneman, Deputy Director, Education, present.
Fiona?
I'm listening now and I'm present. Fiona Frank, Chair of the PEP with Steve, present.
And Steve?
Hi, it's Steve Labeds, Co-Chair of the PEP, present.
Okay, and also we have Anna Martin from Democratic Services. Anna, who's D for?
That's the public one, so that's what the public see in the shared laptop that the live streaming is attached to. But Anna Martin, Democratic Services, present.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, everyone. Okay, I think we've gone through everyone. The only person, there's only one person we're expecting, so she might come later, which is Councillor Judith Smythe. Okay, there's no one else I can see. Right, so we'll go on to the agenda then, everyone, and welcome to this meeting. And the first item is apologies for absence, and I believe the apologies have been received from Helen Reeder, who's the teacher liaison panel, and Robert Sanders, who's the Anglican Diocese. Sarah Christopher, who is the Portsmouth Education Partnership and School Improvement Manager, hopes to attend later, but is at a meeting. Are there any other apologies, Anna?
None that I'm aware of, apart from the one just mentioned about Alison Jeffrey maybe joining later.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, without we'll go on to now declarations of interest, and I'll kick it off with my standard one, which is that I am Vice Chair of Governors at Craneswater Junior School. I'm assuming Terry will want to declare an interest.
Yeah, usual one from me. I am employed at Mayfield School, albeit through an external company.
Thank you. Anyone else have any declarations of interest?
Yes, Susie, I have a declaration of interest. I am a paid official of Hampshire Branch Unison. So if there are any comments about trade unions, I would have to leave the meeting.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Smith. No one else, I don't think.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I didn't.
I do work for Ofsted, so I do work as an Ofsted inspector, but
Okay.
I wouldn't inspect in Portsmouth.
Ah, interesting. I didn't know that, Debbie. I learn something every day. Thank you very much for that. Okay, that's apologies and declarations of interest. So the next item on the agenda is the minutes of the previous meeting held on 15th of July 2020. We need to ensure that this is a correct record of the meeting. Are there any comments from anyone? And I was at the meeting, and I would say that they're an accurate record. Is there anyone else who can say that, who wants to verify that, who's at the meeting? Thank you.
Agreed.
Okay, both the other councillors, thank you very much. So these minutes are approved. Right, so we'll move now on to talking about schools. So item 4 is school improvement, and I believe that Debbie is going to present the first report. So over to you, Debbie.
Thank you. Well, I'm pleased to be here in the capacity as the new Head of School Improvement and Early Years. It's very different working for the council as to being on the other side, but it's a pleasure and a privilege. So I've written this report, and it's focused on the school improvement support for our LA maintained schools, the range and purpose of the school improvement activities, and in particular about how we prioritise schools for that support that we're going to give them. So I have outlined that previously the Portsmouth Education Partnership has used the dashboard of performance information, and that has always been seen as a starting point for a conversation. Because it summarises performance of the schools in statutory assessments, but also has some information around exclusions, attendance, Ofsted inspections, the date of them and the category. Obviously, due to COVID-19, no statutory assessments were undertaken in this past school year. Obviously, we know for GCSEs it was centre assessment grades, but all of those other performance statutory assessments didn't happen, so we can't use that information. We don't have those dashboards to use this year to prioritise school improvement for our LA maintained schools this year. So we do need to have some very clear and transparent set of criteria which we can share with schools, and they will understand how this prioritisation and the support is being given to them. So that's what I've outlined in the report. Obviously, the Ofsted category and the imminence of next inspection is critical. That's about reputation, but it's also about the use of public money and the judgment of our schools. We all know that actually school leadership is critical to the effectiveness of our schools. So if we have new head teachers or senior leadership teams in post in our schools, that's a critical criteria as well. We can look at previous historic performance information, so potentially trends that have happened across years. That could be an indicator of how we might want to prioritise our schools and the support that we're going to give them, particularly if there have been trends that have been consistent. So if a school is on a 3-year downward trend, even if it's performing reasonably okay, that might be an indicator. That we would want to look to offer them some further support. Equally, if there are particular anomalies. So if a school is doing particularly well for reading and writing, but its maths isn't, then we might want to look at that as an indicator. Also, the plans that our schools have to achieve our targets. So it's all very well having a plan, but actually it's about the quality of the plan, the quality of the implementation, and then does it have an impact on those outcomes? And then obviously in the global pandemic that we are in at the moment, that response to money that is being given, like the catch-up premium, and how our schools are responding to remote learning. So we thought that that was a critical criteria for considering about how we would support our schools as well. So I've outlined all of those and given a little bit more detail around those. And also the range and support that I can give. So there is only me in the school improvement team, but I can commission and access other support from teaching schools, projects. Even today we spoke with Hastings. There's a twinning opportunity that they can only have their money if they twinned with somewhere else and can offer some support. So we're looking at a particular reading project there. So I do have access to gaining other support, and then obviously I can commission various support, and I can give some myself as well. So I've outlined all of that for you. And particularly we're looking at, with the new Portsmouth Education Partnership, and you'll see from the education strategy that the School Improvement Board is morphing into something very different, a School Leadership and Effectiveness Board. That is really on the consideration of how important it is that our school leaders are driving the agenda. And that actually we have got that high support, high challenge in place for them. So it's important that I'm part of that. And then also using the criteria of benchmarking and looking where families of schools should be to be more aspirational, how those fit into school improvement plans, and then driving up our standards with that. So that's quite key for us. So playing that part in that impact to make sure that actually, in spite of having all those Ofsted good judgments, that actually what we want is the results in our outcomes for our children and our young people. That's not because we want to be the mid or the top of a league table, but that's because what our children and young people deserve. So this is the first time that I've done that. I don't know.
Thank you. That is
more than that.
Sorry, there was a slight delay there before I jumped in. I just want to say, first of all, thank you for that report. It is exactly, it's fine. It's what we want. But secondly, I think this is the first opportunity I have to formally welcome you into your role, and what a great start that was. So just a couple of comments from me really was, in a way we have to look at the opportunities, and for me personally, not having the dashboard maybe has a silver lining to it, because it has given us an opportunity, particularly with your new arrival, to really shake things up and at the same time refresh the Portsmouth Education Partnership both plan and the way things are working. And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit more in later on in the agenda. But the importance of leadership, as we all know, is crucial in setting the tone and the expectations with any organisation. And I've seen both failing schools dramatically improve overnight, but also I've also seen some schools in the past maybe take a different downward trend with a change of leadership. And as we know, each of those is a unique situation for any school. So thank you for that report. It was really interesting reading. Does anyone else, I can't see any RTSs, does anyone else want to make a comment about that? Oh, Terry's got his hand up. Councillor Norton. He's struggling to get off mute by the looks of it. I'll go on to Councillor Smith, and if we can get back to you, Councillor Norton, and get you off mute, we will. Councillor Smith.
Thanks, Susie. It was a really comprehensive report, but I do worry that if Debbie's a lone person, how can we sort of drive school improvement through one person? And I'm sure she's, able to do 15 things at once, but coming from an age when we had school improvement of quite a few people, I'm not sure how we can sort of drive that agenda to as much as we would like to do. If that, and I take the point that Debbie can bring in other people, but I worry about the school leadership part of it, but I also worry about the school governorship part of it, and how can we do the both?
I see that Mike puts his hand up. I'm sure he will respond, but before I hand over to him, I am of the understanding that actually school improvement was actually taken away from a responsibility for the local authority. So in theory, you're not responsible for it anyway, which is bonkers, because obviously we are, because we care about, getting the best outcomes for all our children. And Debbie has taken over from someone else who was the sole person. I get what you're saying around, is there a case for actually saying there should be more? I actually think there is a lot of potential for a kind of fulcrum type principle where you can actually, through Debbie's kind of guide and leadership, is actually use the energy of the leaders in the city to be making that change. But I don't know whether Mike wants to add anything more.
Well, yeah, just to provide a bit of context and just explain the sort of model we're taking forward. I mean, I completely understand what Jeanette's saying, and in many ways I'd agree with her, because we haven't got enough. I mean, if I think about the funding we actually get for school improvement from the government, it's I think equates to about £55,000-60,000. I mean, it's peanuts really. And we do have a responsibility for our maintained schools. So we have statutory responsibilities there, which Debbie will be responsible for, working with our maintained schools. And you've just heard how we're going to prioritise support for our maintained schools with the limited resources we have. Debbie is also, I should just add, responsible for a few other services which can lean in towards this. So we have the Ethnic Minority Achievement Service. Debbie also has the music service under her wings, and of course early years. But the model we've got in place is running through the Portsmouth Education Partnership, and it's really about trying to get the most from the collective resource that we have within the city and indeed beyond that. And Debbie has already started to do some excellent work in terms of how we can harness that. And there are a variety of opportunities through the Regional Teaching School Hub, which will be established next year, and the funding and support that we can get through that. You've just heard Debbie mention Hastings. That's one of the opportunity areas that the government established a few years ago. We were hoping that Portsmouth might be given the opportunity to bid to become an opportunity area in the second round of funding, but in fact what happened was that the existing opportunity areas were effectively expanded, given more money, rather than any new opportunity areas. But as part of that deal, they had to effectively twin with another area to share some of the best practice and indeed get some of that funding from that tranche of second tranche of funding, and we will be hopefully benefiting from that. We had a meeting with Hastings this morning to talk about literacy as being part of that agenda. So those are just some of the sort of examples of where Debbie's sort of leaning into a variety of funding sources and support to see if we can deliver that within Portsmouth. But it is a stretch, and it's a hell of a challenge for Debbie, and I'm so pleased she's joined us to take on that challenge. But I think that's the position we're in, Jeanette, is that there's no easy answer to this. It is a limited resource, we have limited funding, and that's why we have the Portsmouth Education Partnership, to try and pull together what we have across the city. I'll stop there. That was just a sort of a summary of the model we've got.
No, I appreciate that, Mike. Thank you. And obviously Debbie will get as much support from this committee, I'm sure, going forward as well. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll come back to Councillor Norton now. I think I sorted out the mute issue.
I had, thank you. Sorry, both my chat and mute buttons weren't clicking on, so close and start again, I guess. I think for me, it's about understanding how sure we are that the information that we're receiving is accurate. Obviously, we've been through a year of predicted results in terms of GCSEs. Lots of our students will experience large amounts of large gaps in their learning. And if it's just you, Debbie, I mean, are we relying on what schools are telling us, or are we confident that actually, the information that's projected is accurate? Not to fixate on results, but of course, and Steve and Fiona might be able to jump in here. When the results came out, lots of schools had hugely inflated their results. There was an academy chain on TV that had 21 secondary schools, and lo and behold, every single one of them had seen record results. So for me, it's about the future and moving forward. What happens if we return to a league table system? Does that have a pressure drip down to teachers who, of course, will feel accountability and want to kind of keep up with this raised bar? And how do we present that if we're looking at a huge drop in results and standards in a year, 2 years' time?
Okay, would you like me to chip into that? So as I say, I mean, we cannot use 2020. So we are having to look at past trends because it's just not valid. And although our schools were invited to submit results to information services, anything that comes out of that about what they were, as you say, predicting, particularly for our primary schools where it's different to secondary, is solely for the school's use. So if we're looking at any performance information, then it's got to be from the 3 previous years. And this is for this year, prioritisation of these resources and very much the here and now. So that's why that criteria is in there of previous years. But obviously we have to look to Ofsted, we have to look to changes of leadership, and we have to look at the here and now on that use of catch-up funding and particularly remote learning, so our children do get a continuous education.
Thank you, Debbie. Mike's got his hand up. Oh, sorry. If you was that Fiona as well? I'll come to you.
Yeah,
afterwards.
Don't worry about it. I'll do it in a minute.
Yeah, Mike first.
Sorry, actually, my hand up was from previously. So
sorry, it was a legacy hand.
My fault. Yeah, legacy. Sorry, no. Fiona can step in. No problem.
I'll go to Fiona then.
I just our results were not inflated because we did them on 2 sets of mocks, and then we sent them to the Fisher Family Trust and did them off the algorithm. So in fact, the algorithm put our results up. But those schools that have their results mega inflated are going to look a bit idiotic when they drop down. So if you were a sensible leader, then you would have had them in line with what you'd had in the past. And those, if you were mentioning those academy chains, it's not going to look sensible for them, to be honest. So, you just had to be circumspect.
Thank you for that comment. And I think all professionals realised the pros and cons of the situation this year, and to keep mindful of the fact that it is those young people's outcomes that are the most important thing in all of this. Okay, I can't see any. Oh, Mike put his hand up again.
Just to come back in,
Sorry,
and you'll see it when we come on to the education strategy. What I want to assure members is we're not taking our foot off the pedal in terms of raising outcomes for children and young people, and you'll see that in the education strategy. And we've had a sort of a discussion already at the PET Strategic Board about how we might want to be aspirational, set targets, look at benchmarking, and this links to the work that Debbie was referring to in terms of the school leadership and effectiveness board. So we are absolutely not taking our eyes off this agenda. It is still writ large within the education strategy, albeit we recognise that all the pressures that heads are facing at the moment, just to operate a school at the moment is a challenge, but we're not taking our eye off that ball in terms of standards.
Thank you, Mike. And actually, just dialing into the conversations with schools over the last week, it's been really heartening to hear the fact that actually they really want to be talking about teaching and learning and not hand sanitizer and bubbles. So they really do seem to be getting very stuck in at the moment, which is great. Okay, then. So the recommendation for this is that members of the Education Advisory Board note the school improvement prioritisation and support for 2020-2021. So I'm assuming we collectively endorse that. That's great. So thank you. Unless anyone has any other comments, which I don't think we have, that report is noted, and we go on to the second report, which is item 5, which is the response to COVID-19, which I think Mike is going to present. Some of this we covered in the previous one, didn't we? So
we
this
did,
is kind of extension.
And section 3 is pretty much a summary of what we covered back in July. So I'll briefly go through that part and then spend a bit more time on section 4, which is what we've been doing since we last met in July. So just to recap in terms of what we put in place back in the summer term or the latter part of the spring term. So once the schools had closed and we set up a COVID-19 working group very quickly with a variety of school leaders and partners, including the Regional Schools Commissioner. And then underneath that, you'll be aware there were a number of work streams that we established quickly to address some of the issues that we needed to look at an early stage. And that obviously included infection control. We did a significant amount of work around home learning and digital learning, to help with home learning, but also prepare for what was going to happen the following term. Emotional health and wellbeing was another area we set up. Safeguarding and vulnerable learners, and I'll talk a bit more in a moment about the LA Link coordinators and the work we've been doing with schools to track, monitor and support vulnerable learners. Transition obviously was a key issue, and we had two work streams set up to deal with transition in terms of preschool right across to Key Stage 2, and then also Key Stage 2 up to Key Stage 5 into our colleges. And then supporting all of that work was a huge amount of work we did around communications, and that included weekly meetings with head teachers. It included a daily communication that went out from the council to support all of this work. We also established an early years, what we call a recovery and reset reference group that was set up to support our early years settings. I've mentioned about the LA Link coordinators. I'll come back to that in a moment. And then in addition to all of that, we had LA Link officers who were deployed to our LA maintained schools just to make sure that all of our maintained schools were doing the necessary health and safety checks, the risk assessments, and also putting in place their plans for reopening schools to specific year groups, which came into being during the course of the summer term. So a huge amount of work went in for that first part of the response, which, as I said, we went through with you back in July. What I want to spend a bit more time on is what we've been doing since then, which is set out in section 4 of the report. So first thing to say is that we retained quite a lot of the work streams that were set up in the summer term. So digital learning, and Debbie might want to say a few words about that, because she's had a key role to play in terms of our work around digital learning and how we're supporting schools with their remote access to education plans. You won't be surprised, infection control, that work stream has continued with Helen Atkinson, our Director of Public Health, chairing that. Emotional health and wellbeing, and also safeguarding and vulnerable learners. So those work streams, those 4 work streams, have been retained, and what we've done is actually merge them into the sort of the PEP structures. And when we come on to the next item, the education strategy, you'll see on page 4 of that strategy the new structures and that merging of those COVID-19 work streams. Just briefly go through some of the work we've been doing. So the infection control and health and safety group, they stepped up their work, and they put together a package of information that went out to schools just before the start of term, but also we've continued with that work. So that included a range of guidance, resources, flowcharts, and template letters that schools could use to cover a range of scenarios where there was a positive case or potentially an outbreak, or indeed a local lockdown, which we haven't come to yet, thank goodness. But we've got all those templates set up so schools can use those to send that out to parents as and when is appropriate, and we continue to update that information on a weekly basis. Another really important piece of work we did, working with our corporate comms colleagues, was a Welcome Back to School campaign. We've put on hold basically our school attendance campaign, which was Miss School, Miss Out, and we've been using the Welcome Back to School campaign to make sure and reassure parents about their children coming back to school at the start of term. And the figures are, I think, encouraging. I mean, the attendance rates are pretty good. In fact, I think better than we expected. Most schools have attendance rates well above 90%, and in fact the majority above 95%, which has been really pleasing to see. We've currently got 280 children who have not returned to school. Half of those are open to children's social care and early help, so there is a lead professional in place and a plan in place to get them back into school. And then we are working with our schools through our LA Link coordinators to support those other pupils who haven't returned yet. Some of those are moving on to elective home education, and that is a concern. There may be a case where that is appropriate, but for many, we don't think it is. So we are working with parents and the schools to try and encourage parents to get their children back into school and not to go down that route of elective home education, because the likelihood is that that won't be successful and they'll be having to return to school at some point during the course of this term or next term. So quite a lot of work we're doing around elective home education, and indeed we have a protocol already in place which all schools are implementing, and compared to many other authorities across the southeast, we are doing really well to stem that tide. So we don't have that many going into elective home education compared to some other local authorities. In addition to all of that, we've had a welcome back toolkit and resources for schools to support the campaign, and that was distributed to schools just before the start of term, and we've done similar set of resources for our frontline practitioners who are working with families and also partner organisations. So there is a collective effort within the city to ensure children go back to school, and that has been, I think, really successful. I've mentioned about the continuation of the tracking and monitoring of vulnerable children and young people and the LA Link coordinators. In the summer term, we set that up by deploying existing staff into those roles where they were not working on their previous work. So, for example, the school attendance team, we managed to use them as LA Link coordinators. We deployed staff from the virtual school and a variety of other services who stepped up to that role. And that was fine during the course of the summer term, but of course many of those staff now have returned to their full-time roles. So what we are doing now, we will have in post by November, are 3 full-time LA Link coordinators, and they will cover all of our schools as part of their role. And that's a really welcome development, I think, and I know it's being well received by schools. So, you know, we've learned lessons from last year. It's clear that this is a really important resource, and we've now got resources in place to make that full time. We've also put in place welcome back plans. So these were templates which schools can use to support those children and young people who are struggling to return to school. And many schools have used those templates. We're now moving away from those because we're now into the we're well into the sort of autumn term now. So we're now looking at how we can support the remaining few to come back into school with a variety of plans. We also put in place the Welcome Back to School Wellbeing Support Package for schools, which is based on a package of support developed in Medway, and we've used that to have a bespoke package of support for schools in Portsmouth, which has been well received. And then finally, in terms of the communications that we put in place last term, we've continued with that. So although we're not having weekly meetings with head teachers, we are doing it on a bi-weekly basis, so every 2 weeks. And rather than having a daily communication, we're now sending out a comms every Friday, in addition to the PEP bulletin that goes out each week also. So all of that is in place, including the bi-weekly meetings with multi-academy trusts and the half-termly meetings that we have with our LA maintained schools. So that is a brief summary of what we've been doing over the summer holiday period and into this term in terms of our response to COVID-19. I will stop there and open up for questions, discussion.
I would just say, because I've been doing all the attendance data here, and our attendance is okay, but the gap between pupil premium and normal attendance has grown 4 times. It's not the same in Gosport. It's because there's more pupil premium over there, I suppose. But it's definitely, and in Selsey and several of the other academies that are with GCAT, the same thing has happened. So I think possibly it's masked a bit, but we need to look into that a little bit more, because it's the pupil premium attendance that's taken the hit, not the other.
Yeah, no, I'm not surprised. Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks, Fiona. Yeah.
Thank you, Fiona. Councillor Smith.
It's a very comprehensive plan, and I commend officers for what they've sort of done when it first hit and sort of now. Does Mike think we are prepared as we can be if there is a second wave and an immediate lockdown?
Good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. That I think we are as prepared as well as we can be, and in fact, I think as a result of what we set up last term and what we've put in place this term, we're obviously in a much better position to be able to respond to a second wave or indeed a potential a lockdown by having, for example, the LA Link coordinators now full-time roles in place by November. That puts us in a good position. The work we've been doing around, for example, digital learning and home learning, and the fact that now every school has a plan in place and indeed has been able to enact that plans where they've had to where they've had a positive case, for example, in a school, and they've had to ask children to self-isolate, and that work is ongoing with the support that we're providing around digital learning. So. And I can give lots of other examples. So I think we're in a much better place. We are, if that were to happen, then we are in a good position to respond to that. Obviously, we'll wait and see, and we may need to do more if that scenario arises. But no, I think in answer to your question, Jeanette, we're as good a place as we can be given the circumstances.
And also, the government have made it. You have to legally, by the 22nd of October, provide remote learning for every student that is away, and it's got to be in line with your curriculum and not just work that they've done in the past. Ours is, but I think possibly some schools won't, and now everybody has to be like that by the 22nd of October.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Councillor Norton.
Yeah, thank you very much. I agree. It is a comprehensive plan. I guess it's welcoming to see the attendance numbers for students. But do we have anything on staff numbers? We know that cover is costly. Are schools stating that in any case they are close to not being able to manage because of numbers of staff that are off, having tests, potentially being off due to the unmanageable workloads? We're asking teachers to come back to adapt to the new norm and now set work just in case. Is that having an impact on the numbers of staff that are in schools and potentially the quality of teaching?
Yeah, I mean, it's had an impact clearly, and I know some schools have particularly felt it because of their particular circumstances. But to date, all schools have managed it. I mean, we'll see how that goes, and obviously as infection rates rise, then it's going to become even more challenging. I'd be interested what Fiona and Steve might say from their perspectives. But at the moment, schools across the city are managing this, but I'm under no illusion about the challenges we face as infection rates continue to rise. Fiona, Steve, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I was going to say we're managing at Milton Cross, but people are. We've taken everything we can off teachers to just get them through the day. To be honest, and we kick them out of the building at 5 o'clock so that people aren't staying. But the creeks are starting this week. I've just had that's what I had to. Why I didn't listen. Somebody came in about somebody else that's there, and in Gosport, I know that's not Portsmouth. There's a primary school there where the kids have gone down, some of them with COVID. So lots of the teachers, staff have children in the school, so they've had to come out. So I've got 7 supply staff in that school. And I had a message today to say that tests are not coming back now since yesterday for 5 days. So I think it's going to get more difficult. But again, we doubled up classes and whatever over there and put them in different places because you can put them as long as they're in a bubble in a bigger space now. But I think we'll be glad when half term comes. So we're counting down the days.
That is interesting, Fiona, because I know right at the beginning there was some stress around the turnaround time of testing, which schools were saying that they were managing, but they were really worried that if the testing didn't come back quicker, then it was going to be a strain on staffing. But since then, I'd heard that it was better, but it's only anecdotally.
Sorry, Steve, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say exactly that. I mean, it was a mess in early September because the test and tracing system was such a debacle. Yeah. But since then, it has stabilised, and so it's been a lot quicker, generally speaking, for people to get tests back, and neither of them been having to drive to London or Leicester or Aberdeen or whatever in order to get tests. So that's a lot better. But I think Fiona's quite right. We staff absence across the country, not just in Portsmouth, is always at its worst in November and February. There is always the 2 months where staff absence is at its height. We're yet to reach there, as well as the normal flus and colds. We've got coronavirus on top of that, and very few people are using supply teachers to the same extent because, of course, they bring their own issues in terms of access to the kids. So I think Portsmouth schools, by and large, have managed so far very well with all the support of the local authority and everything else, and from the multi-academy trusts as well. I worry about how we're going to get through to Christmas, just in terms of that. And like Fiona, in my schools, we're taking everything essential off the table, because actually if we don't desperately need to do it, let's just concentrate on educating the kids, giving them the best shot that they can of being in school, but keeping it going, and that's going to be tough. It's one of those things. I mean, we all knew this was going to be a tough year, and it's unpredictable. We don't know what's going to happen in terms of lockdowns and school closures and things like that. We are committed, all the professionals in the city are committed to giving the kids the best shot that they can, but you have to take account of all these issues. And it does mean, although, as we said earlier, we're not taking our eyes off progress and pushing kids to the high standards that they can get, because that's what they need, we're not always helped by the system that we get towards doing that. And you know, we were talking earlier about measuring figures and league tables. That's going to be pointless for 2021 as it was for 2020. There's no point doing that. The important thing is to focus on what are the children getting, where are they getting to, and it's finding ways of going back to measuring that rather than just measuring the pig as it gets fatter.
Terry, did you want to come back on any of that?
No, just to say that it's reassuring that, you know, unnecessary workloads are being addressed and things like that. That's all really reassuring. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, the only points that I would add is that is this balance, isn't it, between focusing on standards but also weighing up for the needs of the staff as well. Just to add to that, there has been, Sarah's joined now. Sarah Christopher, I was about to talk about the extensive work that she's done around, you know, teacher and staff well-being, as well as the attention that we've given to children. So that is a really key point. But the other thing I think that what's coming through on this is, whilst we have had school cases, we haven't had school outbreaks. And so that would take us into a whole different level. And as Mike says, we're as prepared as we can be. Sarah, did you want to come in and just mention the stuff about the staff well-being?
Happy to do that, Susie. Yeah, apologies for being late. Well, we've sent a pack to all schools with lots of links and resources that people can use to support staff right across the board. But we're also particularly not concerned, but we're particularly aware of the need to support our head teachers, because our heads are themselves doing huge amounts to try and support their staff, and staff are doing huge amounts to support pupils. So we are using some of the Return to Education Wellbeing grant to support our head teachers, and we've commissioned some coaching sessions by ex-head teachers who know the city well but are no longer working within the city, to provide a degree of a confidential safe space for our heads. We also have a number of phone lines of officers, including people like education psychologists, who are available for kind of ad hoc confidential conversations. So that goes alongside all of the other more formal mechanisms that are in place there for schools. But yes, it is very much a priority, one that we're looking at, and we've got some training that we're about to roll, or is about to be made available to all schools, and that very much looks at the need to look after your own well-being in order to be able to look after the children.
Okay, thank you. I can't see anyone else wanting to make any comments or ask any questions. So at this board, we need to note the actions that have been taken over the last 6 months by the Council and partners to respond to the pandemic and the ongoing work that is in place in order to continue to support education settings. And I'd actually like to definitely place on record my thanks to Mike and Alison and everyone else. I mean, you know, what we're hearing anecdotally is from local schools is a lot of thanks and praise for the support of the local authority. I've also picked that up from people in certain academies around who've got that ability to compare local authorities. We're never complacent, but it is really nice to get positive feedback. So thanks to everyone, all the officers, for doing an amazing job. Okay. So that brings us on to the last report, which I guess in many ways is the future, which is the Portsmouth Education Strategy 2020 to 2023. And I believe that Mike is going to present this report. Over to you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'll go through that just to bring it up. Okay, so yes, so what we've done is we've attached to this report in Appendix 1 the draft Portsmouth Education Strategy 2020 to 23. It's pretty much there, but we have just given schools an opportunity to comment on that draft. In fact, I think we've given the deadline this Friday. So we're aiming to publish the strategy next week, and really what we're looking for today is for your endorsement, really, and obviously any comments and questions you have on the strategy today, which we can then take on board in terms of a final iteration of that strategy. But what I'd like to do is just take you through a bit of background to the strategy, and particularly around some of the structures that we've put in place to support it, and then I'll just run through briefly the 9 priorities, and I'll probably ask a few other colleagues just to chip in as we go through each priority, but I'll be fairly brief, and I'm sort of kind of hoping you've had a chance to have a look at the strategy before today's meeting. So in terms of a bit of background, this is a 3-year strategy, and it replaces the strategy we had in place for 2017 to 2020. We had all sorts of plans in place over the summer to do an extensive consultation. We had briefing events set up to support that consultation. Of course, we had to sort of cancel all of that, put that all on hold as we responded to the pandemic. But over the course of the last 6 months, we've reflected on the work we've done on the previous strategy, and we pulled together this draft strategy with a degree of consultation, but I accept it was nothing like we were hoping, which is why we've allowed a little bit of time to consult with schools over the course of the last couple of weeks before we published the strategy. I think it's also important just to reflect on the structures. So this strategy will be delivered under the auspices of the Portsmouth Education Partnership, and will be overseen by the PEP Strategic Board. I think a welcome development this year has been the decision to merge the PEP Strategic Board with the Portsmouth Multi-Academy Trust Strategic Forum. Previously, and over the last 3 years, we've had the MATs meeting separately to the board. In fact, they met just a few hours before the board would meet, so they could have a discussion and then feed into the PEP Strategic Board that met afterwards. As a result of the last 3 years, and in particular the work that's been done over the last 6 months or so, with MATs taking a really important role in that work, we've really worked well, I think, as a collective. It felt the right time to bring those two boards together. So we now have a single board, an expanded membership, and we have now a seat at that board for every multi-academy trust in the city, of which there are 11. But that we felt was a really good way forward. And then the other thing we've done is obviously merge those work streams that we set up under COVID-19 into the PEP structure, as well as creating another group around literacy, which I'll come on to later as one of our key priorities. So that's just a bit of background to the work we've done to set up the strategy and the structures. In terms of the priorities, there are 9 which we set out here. I should add that running through these 9 priorities, there are a number of important themes. So inclusion is one of those, which has been a really important priority for the partnership, and that runs throughout the 9 priorities. And to a lesser extent, also work around early years and post-16, which don't feature as individual priorities. We've had quite a bit of feedback on this already, and I'd be interested in your thoughts about whether we needed a particular priority around those areas. The general consensus was that we don't, so long as it's reflected in the priorities, but we can come back to that. So if I just run through briefly the 9 priorities. So the first one is around strong leadership and ambition at all levels within individual schools to improve effectiveness and outcomes for children and young people. As Debbie referred to earlier, we've set up or remorphed the School Improvement Board into the School Leadership and Effectiveness Board. And Sue Sampson, who's the Chief Executive of the University of Chichester Academy Trust, will be chairing that board. Andrew Olive, who's been chairing the School Improvement Board, will continue to be part of that board, and I think is taking up a vice chair role within that. So that board will be particularly leading all our work around leadership, around school effectiveness, the work we're doing around benchmarking, target setting, and external challenge. All of that will come under the School Leadership and Effectiveness Board. So that's the first priority. The second priority is around a digital learning strategy, and this builds on the work we did in the summer term to support remote access to education and to capitalise on the opportunity that digital learning gives us. We've set up a digital learning or digital pioneers group, and we've commissioned the Thinking Schools Academy Trust through Natalie Shepherd to lead on a lot of this work and support that work. And Debbie is very much involved. I'll just pause there. Debbie, do you want to just say a few words about that group and the work we're doing with TSAT?
Yes, of course. So through the pandemic and the lockdown previously, we had a digital and home learning group that was led by Alison Bradley, senior HMI that was seconded to Portsmouth, and we were particularly looked at a baseline and what children were getting at home across schools. It wasn't a judgment, it was just purely trying to establish that baseline. But we've moved a long way from there. So from September, we've started to then really refine down what is it that schools need. And really what we don't want to do is that any school to be left behind on remote learning. So we've started a series of webinars. There's been one, and quite rightly, the first one was around safeguarding for teachers and for staff, but also for children at home and the dangers and everything that can happen with digital learning. And there have been 2 this week. So yesterday there was hybrid teaching, and today flipped teaching. So a whole new language about what is happening. Particularly interesting, flipped teaching being if a teacher has to self-isolate at home, but the children are at school. So if they can remotely be teaching with a class that is managed in school, but actually be delivering, provided they're fit and well and healthy, it might be something to do with their family or a contact that they've had, that they can deliver their teaching, but it's flipped around because actually the teacher's not present in the school. So we're working very much on that and webinars to help schools understand new terms and how it can happen. I think it's probably fair to say that secondaries are, by their very nature of the age of the students and the independence of the students, and where families tend to invest in the technology for those older children further along the line. So particularly thinking around our infant and primary schools, how this can be managed for them. So we've got the webinars going on. We put out a toolkit of information so that actually schools could think about their remote learning plans that they had to have in place by the end of September. And now we're moving on to remote learning policies with all the terminology and the glossaries, and to ensure that schools can meet this continuity directive that they've got to have in place from the 22nd of October. So lots happening along the way, and a series of webinars. So the Digital Pioneers Group are the movers and the shakers that can lead the way, but actually far more important to me is no school gets left behind. What about the infant schools, the younger schools, the schools where the heads are less confident with the technology? So we're very much looking at scooping up from there and driving that part forward.
Thanks, Debbie. And just to add to that, we're also looking at how we can make sure that all children and young people have access to a device and also internet access, because that we know has been an issue for some of our families who haven't been able to provide the home learning because of that particular issue. So we're working with Shaping Portsmouth, for example, and a range of other partners to look at how we can make those devices available on top of what's already out there in terms of government support. So a lot of work going on there also. Okay, thanks. I'll move on because I know we'll run out of time if we spend too much time on each priority. So the next one to go on to is priority 3, which we've referred to in part already. So this is the focus on literacy and early language. That's not to say that other priorities aren't important. So maths, for example, is still important, still a priority for us. And indeed, actually, we've had some really good successes around maths, and outcomes have improved. And we've done a lot of work with the Solent Maths Hub around the Mastery programme. But where we are still lacking and where we know we've got some significant weaknesses is around literacy and early language. And of course, that is the foundation really for a lot of the curriculum. So we're going to make that a key priority for us, and we are setting up the early language and literacy development group, which Debbie referred to earlier. So I won't say too much more on that because we've heard a bit about that already, but that's going to be a key priority and a new one for us for this year. Priority 4 is around the recruitment, retention of teachers and leaders. That was a priority which was there in the previous strategy. We've got a group that's already set up there, which is currently chaired by Simon Barrable, the principal of Portsmouth College. And of course, over the last few years, we've been developing the Teach Portsmouth brand, and underneath that brand doing a variety of things to support the recruitment and retention of teachers. And that has been successful. I mean, COVID-19, if there's anything that's positive come out of that, is the fact that actually it's led to a renewed interest in terms of teaching. And if you talk to our initial teaching training providers, most, if not all, are full in terms of their numbers for this year, which is great. But obviously what we want to see is, one, we attract the best. And secondly, having got them into the profession, we keep them, because that's been the issue in the past. Within 5 years, we've lost 50% of those teachers, and we just can't afford to be in that position going forward. So that work continues. That's a key priority for us. Priority 5 is around infection control, which is a new priority and builds on the work that we did over the summer. And obviously, we now have an infection control and health and safety group set up, chaired by Helen Atkinson, our Director of Public Health. That will continue for the foreseeable future. Priority 6 is around safeguarding in schools. Now, this is a new one, and it reflects some of the issues that cropped up over the last 18 months or so from Ofsted inspections. We've had 2 schools that have gone into an inadequate status because of safeguarding issues where the policies and processes have not been robust. And that's been picked up in those inspections. We've also been reflecting on the early help and safeguarding compact audit that schools are required to do every 2 years. And we've noticed within that some weaknesses, some what we felt were overgenerous self-assessments that were done by schools. So we've made that a priority this year to reflect those issues. And a lot of work is being done by the team that supports the Portsmouth Safeguarding Children's Partnership and the training that we do with schools. So that is in there. That's priority 6. Priority 7 is around promoting emotional health, wellbeing and resilience in education. And we have a children's emotional health and wellbeing group set up to oversee that. I'll pause there because you've heard a bit from Sarah already, but Sarah, do you want to mention anything? I'm just thinking about the mental health support teams, for example. Anything else you want to add in terms of this priority?
I've probably covered the main points, but you're right. The mental health support teams is a huge resource coming into the city. We've got 2 teams already in place. These are part of the government Transforming Mental Health Green Paper offer. And a 3rd team currently being recruited now, which will place us as one of the few areas in the country, possibly the only one, I ought to find that out, which will have full full coverage across our schools. So these are people doing clinical work with children, young people and families, but also whole school work, which potentially can look at that support for not necessarily for individual staff, but actually the ethos and stuff that can support well-being across the whole system. It's a huge resource that will hopefully bridge some of that gap. It's well below the CAMS limit, but above what the resources that a lot of schools currently offer.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, moving on, last two priorities. So priority 8 is around school attendance, which obviously was a big priority for us over the last 3 years. And we have seen some improvements in school attendance, which has been encouraging. We've seen some reductions in some of the issues that we've been facing around exclusions, although it has still been fairly high in the secondary school sector. But we want to obviously continue with that. Now, we've put on pause the school attendance campaign, as I referred to earlier, with a focus on Welcome Back, but we will be going back to that probably after the October half term, and indeed we're starting to see some elements of that return. So, for example, issuing penalty fixed notices to parents, particularly those that are taking children on a holiday during term time, for example. So a lot of work there, and of course attached to that also is the work we've been doing in terms of the tracking and monitoring of vulnerable children and young people who are struggling to return to school, and the role of our LA Link coordinators, and obviously making that a permanent position from November. So that is still a key priority for us going forward, and that also includes the work we've been doing to address reduced timetables that go beyond 6 weeks without a clear plan in place. The work we've been doing to reduce the numbers of children going to elective home education, and all of that work as well to reduce exclusions within the city. So that will continue. And then the final priority, which is a priority in the last strategy around sufficiency, although the focus really now is on specialist places. We've been doing work around primary, and we saw a significant expansion of primary school places, 1,600 extra places across the city to meet the bulge in pupil numbers that we were seeing. And obviously more recently we've been looking at expanding our secondary school places to meet that demand, which we're now seeing in our secondary schools, and the number of schemes have been completed in the last month or so to support that. What we're now moving on to is probably the more challenging, if I'm honest, and the more complex area of special education needs. And these are the most complex places that we need, where we're seeing the most significant demand. And we're looking at an inclusive strategy, which does include expansion of specialist school places in our special schools, but also how we can support our mainstream schools. And that will include some inclusion centres and expansion there, as well as helping our mainstream schools to become even more inclusive. It's an incredibly complex agenda. It has significant revenue funding challenges attached to that, but we have a demand. We're going to have to meet that head on. We've been doing a significant piece of work, which will conclude in the next few weeks, and we will have a strategy in place to deliver that. And in fact, we're just putting in a capital bid to members, which no doubt you'll see shortly, which we hope will support this agenda. So those are the 9 priorities. We think that is right going forward. In the strategy that is in Appendix 1, you'll see actions attached to each priority. Those are the actions that we're taking forward in year 1, so 2020-21, and obviously next year, towards the end of the academic year, we'll review those priorities and those actions, and we will do another version. So we've got a new set of actions for 21-22. But in terms of today's meeting, what we'd like you to do is to reflect on what I've gone through and endorse that plan, or indeed actually take any questions following my presentation. So I will stop there. Thank you.
Mike, can I just make a comment on the recruitment one?
Yeah.
You wonder where the government are going to save their money from. Well, they're going to save it on teacher recruitment, because the grants to people for science and stuff have gone down from 30 grand to 7, and some of them, the geography, have gone from 15 to 0, because they know they'll be getting more teachers in, so that might have an influence.
Yeah, I heard that. That's really disappointing to hear some of those changes and some of the bursaries that are available to would-be teachers. Yeah, no, I'm aware of that.
Mike?
Susie, you're on mute, by the way, just to...
Sorry. Councillor Norton, you've put RTS, so I'll go to you next.
Thank you, Susie. Yeah, I think it's really welcoming. Those 9 points look fantastic. The two that really stood out to me were point 4 about recruitment and retainment, and I guess and point 7 about emotional health. So on the first one, in terms of the recruitment, do we have any feedback in terms of the quality of new teachers that are coming through, and have we upped our measures? Are we doing anything to go out and look for those who may have transferable skills to bring them into teaching? We know lots of people aren't going to be faced with unemployment. What are we doing to sort of offer out our hand, I guess, and try to encourage those who could make very good teachers?
I'm going to jump straight in, and then Mike can come in. Yeah, through the Teach Portsmouth website and also the activity around that, we are definitely focusing on that. In fact, I think the week after next is the first of a series of webinars, which the first one is where we're interviewing 2 newly qualified teachers to actually talk through the process and all the different ways of accessing teaching. So and then there'll be follow-on webinars after that. So if you and obviously we're going to use as much effective comms as possible to reach out to people, as you say, in that situation. But I think I completely agree with what you're saying, is that what you want is you want good teachers to come into teacher training, and not just people who want to do it because there's nothing else to do. And actually, sometimes out of negative situations, come really positive things. And I know loads of teachers who've ended up getting into teaching because of personal circumstances, who've ended up being brilliant. And they didn't do it straight away from university or whatever. Mike, do you want to add anything else on that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think if it's helpful, we can send the links to the Teach Portsmouth website, and in fact, it's well worth reading the first newsletter that was published, I think last week, which and credit to the team that have been working on that, because I think there's some excellent material in there, which I hope will pay dividends in terms of attracting the best talent into the city. It's not just about numbers. We want the best. So yeah, a lot of work going to do that. Just to mention about in terms of what's going on in schools, we're about to do a survey, which I think is going to be launched after half term. And Fiona and Steve, don't worry, it's fairly basic. It's a monkey survey, a survey monkey. It won't take up too much time, not onerous, but that will hopefully give us a bit of a baseline in terms of what's happening around recruitment, retention, vacancies, and so forth. So happy to share that information once that's available, and we can pick that up in perhaps the next board meeting. So yeah, we should have a better idea what's going on in the city when that's completed.
Thank you. Councillor Smythe, welcome.
Thank you.
And do you want to raise a question or make a comment?
Yes, I had 2 questions. One is about the sort of numbers of children who don't have access to broadband or at home and can't therefore support remote learning, and what's the sort of numbers of those? And if I could reserve the right to ask another question after that's been answered.
Sure. We've covered some of this, but Debbie, do you have any idea?
I was here when that bit was being discussed.
Oh, you were? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that we put out in a toolkit of resources was a survey that schools could put out to families to actually ascertain what devices did they have, because it's not, is it a smartphone, is it a tablet, is it a PC, and particularly for younger children, because often it's prioritised to older children, or if there's multiple children, siblings in a family. So schools have been ascertaining that and trying to get that information back. And then Alison Critchley is working with this digital donation scheme, so Shaping Portsmouth, and potentially about devices being donated in white, got ready to be distributed. So we are pursuing a number of different avenues, so that once we know from schools what their sorts of situation is, that actually then we, the ultimate aim is that every child has some sort of device and can access learning from home.
Good, thank you. Yes, I didn't hear that before, so that's comforting. And I'm glad. I guess you'd have to do some sort of survey, because I didn't know otherwise how you'd find out. Be interesting to know what the numbers are when it comes to it. My next question.
I'll just mention when we did this survey for just year 11 before the summer, we had about 15 people without devices. We've just done it now and we've got one. So people have obviously over the summer, I know we've provided some, but over the summer parents have obviously taken it on board and got devices, and we've spent all our spare cash on Chromebooks so that we can, you know, the other children that haven't got them can have them. But I think parents are now more aware that they need a digital device.
Oh, that's quite encouraging, really, isn't it? And yeah, that's a big jump. Thank you.
I don't know whether Steve might want to come in, because the other thing we
sorry, Steve has got his hand up.
And I don't know whether this is what Steve's going to say, but anyway, the other thing we're trying to promote and work with schools is around some of the sort of one-to-one subscription models that are available. So some schools are looking to, through a third-party supplier, provide devices to all their parents. Parents have to pay for that over the course of a number of years. And where parents are struggling because they're disadvantaged families, then potentially schools can fund some of that through pupil premium or however they determine that. So we're seeing that, and I think we'll see more of that across the city. But Steve, sorry, I'm stealing your thunder. What did you
No, it's fine. In fact, I was going to comment on something else first, but I'll comment on that to start with. We found amongst our 2,000 kids that it was running at about 15% that didn't have access on a regular basis to anything, which is quite significant. It's about 3 or 4 times worse if you're from a disadvantaged family. So scrabbling around for bits and bobs isn't good enough to do that, which is why, as a trust, we've invested hundreds of thousands of pounds diverted from other projects that we were doing into providing that kind of access. We know we can't sustain that indefinitely, which is why, as Mike said, we've switched to a subscription model, but the subscription for disadvantaged families is nothing. It's peanuts. They get a full Chromebook and all the access that goes with that for £10 a year, which it's still £10 a year, but it's almost nothing. But it's that level of investment that we need to make, and I think most schools are starting to realise that. Some aren't, so they're still determinedly spending their money on other things which they think are going to be more important, and fair enough. But it really does take a shift in thinking. Most schools ended up with more money than they realised at the end of the year, despite the extra spend on preparations for dealing with COVID. And so that money, there's no reason why that couldn't be diverted into this. And it's going to be interesting to look when all the annual reports come out, particularly for academies. It's going to be really interesting to look who's got money in the bank and why they haven't spent it at this stage. So that comments, because I agree with Councillor Smythe, that's the big disadvantage to this. If you've got just a very small number of kids who haven't got access to what you're trying to do online, the whole thing goes down. There's no point. The other thing I was going to say,
just to interrupt there, I can see there might be a problem if you had a very large family with lots of children, some of whom were able to get something from their school and some perhaps didn't, or where there's maybe you've got several different machines in one household, which is a nightmare really, because you need to I mean, you don't want as a parent to have to support the access and technology for lots of different machines. So standardization must be what you're aiming for.
Yeah, and Chromebooks are the answer, but that's a personal opinion. The point I was going to make earlier was going back to Councillor Norton's question about the importance of recruitment and retention. And I want to make the point, which I always make, that the retention is a much bigger issue for us than the recruitment. So, as Fiona mentioned earlier, the DfE are taking away a lot of the bursaries. That's because they haven't worked. They're pointless. They're just throwing money at things and it doesn't work. What they have rolled out, and which we are encouraging them to roll out more and to apply for Portsmouth, is extra payments for staff at the end of their second year, their fourth year, so their sixth year, to actually retain them within school. And that's a much more constructive use of money than literally bribing people to come into teaching when they may not be most appropriately in that profession. That's not throwing money at it, isn't the answer though. It is about schools working on how they develop staff, because that's what allows us to retain staff, and that's the big bit in that priority that, as co-chair of the PEP, I want to see embedded. We've got a lot of the flashy recruitment stuff. That's fine, but it's retaining staff that is the biggie.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Steve. Councillor Smith.
It is related to that point. Is there any work being used on support staff? Because we have some excellent support staff who could go up to being teachers, but are not encouraged in that way in a lot of schools. And is there any work that we can do to sort of encourage that process? Because to me, it's a natural process. But for some schools in difficult times, trying to sort of look after their support staff as well as their teaching staff, it can be more difficult. So is there any work we can do on that?
That's a very good question. Steve, did you have your hand up to respond to that one in particular?
Yes, it was to say, and I think Fiona's probably going to say the same thing. Yes, is the answer. That's an invaluable tool for training people who can be really good teachers. And I think many schools have realised that over the years. And so there are lots of support systems in place, including subject knowledge enhancement courses, training and development on ways of working with things. But for us, that's a very rich vein. We've developed some very, very good teachers who started life in other roles within the school. And for us, that's gold dust. So I don't think you'd find many colleagues that were ignoring that. But it is something that we can look at again when we look at this and see if there is a clear route through. Because one of the things we were hearing back from support staff is the formal mechanisms of training, so not to do with us, were way too complicated. So even that alone was putting people off. But that's bureaucrats for you. We can simplify all that.
Well, actually, I can say there's lots of different. Yeah, there's lots of different routes into teaching now. And so, to be honest, you can get into teaching without a degree if you're good enough, and you can, like Steve said about the enhancement programs and what have you. And if you pick the right route, you just need to know what's out there.
And just to add one point on this, Jeanette, I mean, this is very dear to my heart because, of course, as you know, that I taught on the foundation degree in learning support at the university for years. And I actually see so many of my former students in Portsmouth schools. It is such a brilliant model to be able to take local people who are interested in teaching, enable them to go through a whole degree whilst working, and then actually have that sort of throughput into becoming teachers. I think it is really, really good. It is something that we discussed one of the Teach Portsmouth boards, but I will take it back because whilst we were focusing on a breadth of routes in, this might be something that's worthy of a specific highlighting, and we could do some marketing. So thank you very much for that.
Sorry, Susie, to jump in, only because on this point I don't want to lose the point, if that's okay. Apologies to Judith on that. I think that's really important as well. And I guess, I mean, certainly the feedback that I hear is actually recent cohorts haven't been particularly strong, or certainly as they have been in the past, in terms of resilience. And I think we sometimes get lots of people that leave university, go into teaching because they have to do something, and then it leads to large dropouts. And this may give us an opportunity to bring in some wiser heads and some more resilient members of staff, I guess. But it would need that targeting and a real focus on support staff or teachers, LSAs that we know are good with children, to do that. Because I do think support staff sometimes feel trapped. I think they would like to teach, but actually they're working full time. They're support staff often because they are bringing up families, etc. So I think it really is about working with people's strengths.
I agree. Although I have to say, as a former teacher, having brilliant support staff in your classroom, you don't want them to go and become teachers. You want to keep them. But anyway, sorry, Councillor Smythe.
I was just glad to see the priority around mental health. And I think, Mike, you said that it was going to be at a sort of lower level than the traditional CAMS thresholds would be, if I've got that right. I just wondered whether it's going to be a single service for the whole city, or whether it's going to be portioned out between schools, or whether it's going to be and how it links in with the CAMS service, and how people get access to it. Because sometimes these initiatives have been, and there have been quite a few of them in the past, have been quite confusing for people, and people haven't known how to access them, and there've been problems with actually getting the impact that we want.
Yeah, I'll pass over to Sarah. I mean, I think Sarah's going to reassure you on this point, because the mental health support teams absolutely are linked into CAMHS, but it is a different level of support. But anyway, Sarah, do you want to explain?
Yes. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, they're actually in Portsmouth. It's not the same everywhere else, but in Portsmouth, our mental health support teams actually sit within CAMHS. So the team manager works within CAMHS and is managed by that service. So there's a really clear link between the mental health support teams and CAMHS. So, for example, if somebody calls into the CAMHS single point of access, but they don't meet the criteria for a CAMHS referral, they might be signposted to the mental health support teams. The mental health support teams are school based, so the referrals for those teams all come through schools. So it may be that schools kind of might put out some communications to their parents about having access to this, but it's not a self-referral service, it is a school-led service. But it's still early days, so we're still working out exactly how it works. In terms of how the time has been proportioned, initially there were 32 schools in the first wave of bidding. And then the second wave means we're able to offer something to all of the schools in due course. So at the moment, while they're still finishing their training, they'll have a bit more capacity in January. But as it stands at the moment, we've worked out their allocation based on the free school meal head count in each school, trying to get a balance of the size of the school alongside the level of deprivation, and trying to make it transparent, because sometimes if it was based on something like the number of referrals that get put into CAMHS, actually that could be because the school is really good at passing on appropriate referrals, or it could actually be that the school does nothing themselves and they send referrals straight in. So we wanted a really transparent mechanism, and then when we get additional capacity in January, we have already we're working with the emotional health and wellbeing group to say, is this a fair way to allocate resources? What it actually means in terms of the secondary schools, on average, they get at least a day a week per secondary school of mental health support team time. And even the smallest of schools in the scheme gets at least half a day a fortnight. So actually, for some of the schools, they're kind of going, oh, I'm not sure how I'm going to use this much time. So this is where we're working with them about the whole kind of culture and the whole school ethos. So to make sure it's not just about working with individual children and kind of trying to fix them. That's not what this is about at all. It's about having groups and things like that. It'll also be skilling up some of the staff that are already working in the schools. And again, in the secondary schools, they will be helping us to train and provide ongoing support for youth mental health ambassadors. So they'll kind of be like a peer mentoring type scheme, but they will get the support. So rather than putting additional pressure on the schools, they will get the support from the mental health support teams to support them in their role. So again, that will be an ongoing way that spreading the support through the school at all different levels. But the link into CAMHS is a really important one, and it's early days. We will keep it under review, but I'm pretty sure that's one bit we've got already in place.
That's reassuring. So mostly it'll be groups of children who referred to it where they could benefit from group work, not much individual work at the school.
So it will be individual work as well. Yes, it'll be individual work, and for the younger children it'll be work with the families as well, because actually that's the evidence base. So what they will be doing evidence-based interventions. A lot of it is around kind of anxiety, low mood, but a lot of work around CBT type interventions. So at the moment actually the anxiety stuff is really good. So things like transitions and stuff like that, but they're not looking at mental ill health. That remains the business of specialist CAMHS.
And will there be any relationship with educational psychologists?
Absolutely, yes. So I kind of link between the two, but yes, the education psychologists are on. We have a partnership group bringing together education psychologists, multi-agency behaviour support teams, CAMHS, school nursing, early help, and we meet regularly to make sure we're all joining up what we're doing across the piece as best we can.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you. Okay. I mean, it'll be interesting to have a chat about that some stage, because I think there's so many players in this and such enormous need that it's quite easy to find a service that just gets too process. But just because there's so many players and contacts and new referrals coming in and parents making demands that the school aren't delivering, and I mean, it's quite a difficult thing to produce an operational policy for that kind of thing that really works. But I'm sure you've done a good job. But it'd be interesting.
We're doing our best. Very happy to speak to you outside of this.
No, I'm reassured. But thank you.
Any other comments on the PEP strategy? I think we've.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Is that Steve?
No, it was Frank.
Oh, sorry, Frank. I didn't see you.
I've yet to receive the technology to press the RTS button.
Come on in, Frank.
My question actually is to Mike, if he could just reassure us with an update on page 48 of the anticipated building works that were put in place that were going to be finished by September. Did they manage to get finished, or are we COVID, held up?
No, yeah, okay. Well, I can be a very positive response on that. I mean, it kind of feels like a bit like a miracle, but anyway, yes, they were all completed. We had a slight delay at Admiral Lord Nelson School, which Steve knows all about, but actually that has been completed. I think Steve hopefully will give the thumbs up there in terms of what we did there. But no, all the big expansion schemes. So it's Admiral Lord Nelson, the Portsmouth Academy, Charter, and then also some of the specialist school places at Redwood Park and Cliffdale. Yep, they've all been completed.
For carrying on then, and thank you for that, Mike. The parents that have spoken to me over the last few weeks, I've got to say, has been very positive. So if you can pass on to the heads, and that includes Admiral Lord Nelson, because obviously we've got quite a few people that go over there, and Terry School. And I don't want to leave anyone out, but the reports from the parents have been very, very positive.
Good, that's good to hear.
Thank you for that feedback. That was really good. Okay. Councillor Smith has.
It's just a comment on the actual strategy. I thought it was really comprehensive, and I know there's sort of lots of work sort of gone into that, so it was really sort of good. Mike made a comment earlier about early years and post 16. Now that didn't jump out at me that it needed its own priority, because it was across all ages and if that was the aim of the strategy, then it worked. So I think it's a very good strategy, and officers should be congratulated on that. It's very good. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeanette. I mean, just on early years and post, we are strengthening actually, because early years in particular, and we've had a meeting already about this separately, particularly around some of the language, because we tend sometimes just to talk about schools rather than early years settings. So we're going to look at that, as well as have a section which we'll include in the introduction, as we have done about inclusion, just to make sure that is really clear and how we're taking that forward. So there'll be a bit of an update, which you'll see in the published version next week.
Excellent. And I love the use of colour on the on the PEP structure.
That's Sarah Christopher can take.
Sarah Christopher, you're amazing. I love it. It speaks to me anyway, for sure. So thank you so much. I don't think there were any questions or comments from anyone else, which brings us to the end of that final item, where we've asked to endorse the final draft, which we have, with obviously the invitation from Mike to, if we have any post-meeting thoughts, to go back, particularly around the early years and post-16 comments. So thank you, everyone. Which brings us on to the final item on this agenda, which is dates for future meetings, which this is just for noting, which is Wednesday, the 10th of February, that will bring us up to nearly the first anniversary of schools closing. So that will have come around quick. And then the 14th of July. Who knows what the world would look like then? But in the meantime, stay safe, everyone, and thank you so much for a really, really robust and interesting meeting.
Thanks, Susie.
Bye-bye.
I'll turn the live stream off now.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anna. Bye.
Bye. There's a live stream.
All right, bye everyone. Thanks a lot.